This is the Tennessee Native Plant Society's Native Plant Seminar Series. We are into our third year of doing this now. It is by Zoom so that all of our members across the entire state of Tennessee may participate. We've had a lot of marvelous speakers, and I'm sure tonight's going to be no exception at all. Our speaker is Erin Manzitto-Tripp. She wrote the book she's co-author of The Field Guide to Lichens of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And part of my difficulty in communicating with you is because I am in the park at the moment for a whole week of looking at all the gorgeous native plants and lichens. We did see quite a few today. So I'm excited about that. But this is why the jury rig with using my tablet instead of my normal computer, actually using two tablets. My tablet for contact for the process of doing this video in Zoom, and my husband's tablet for the sound, since for some reason my sound is not working. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Erin. She is co-author of the field book that I just mentioned, The Lichens of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, which is home to 909 recognized species of lichens, and I'm betting it's more now, more than any other national park in the United States, as well as nearly half of all species known to occur in eastern North America. Erin is an assistant professor of ecology and evolutionary biology, as well as curator of botany at the University of Colorado. Her works include Field Guide to the Lichens of White Rocks and publications in prestigious scientific journals. Welcome, Erin. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for agreeing to join us. We're excited about this presentation. And I'm going to ask everybody, hold your questions to the end or write them down in the chat box, and that way we will feed them to Erin when she's finished giving her talk. Okay, without any further ado, Erin, the floor is yours, or the screen in this case.
Great, thanks. 1 second. Yeah, great. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me as best as you can? I'm under the weather, so please forgive my voice. But as long as it's coming through, great. Just as a reminder, as Karen mentioned, if you could make sure your microphones are muted, that's in the lower left-hand corner of the Zoom window. I actually am fortunate to be joined by two of my graduate students who are both lichen students, Seth Raynor and Jacob Watts. They're both online, actually. So with that said, Jacob and Seth, I'm going to put you to work. If folks want to use the chat, you've got two other lichen experts on that can help to answer questions, and they're very talented. So please do feel free to ask. Who likes to wait to ask their questions? I don't. Anyway, that makes me annoyed. All right, I'm going to share my screen. And make it full size. Just a second.
That's good.
All right, can everybody see that okay? Actually, I can't see any of you. So just can one person say yes?
You can answer?
Yes.
Yeah, great, terrific. Okay. I have more or less what amounts to a photo slideshow tonight. I figure there's a lot of you that have seen lichens out and about and may be curious about them, and you're going to be frustrated like I am that 1 hour is not enough time to convey how amazing these organisms are. So do your best to hang with me, and as always, feel free to send me an email or use the chat, and we'll talk afterwards as well with any questions. But as many of you already know, Tennessee is a global biodiversity hotspot for lichens. That includes the entire state, actually the entire southeastern United States. It includes especially the Smokies, but it's really a phenomenon of the southeastern United States as a whole. I just want to acknowledge first off that almost all photographs in this talk are from our field guide. So they're either my photographs or James's photographs, many of which were used in the publication of the book that Karen just introduced you to. And that was published by the University of Tennessee Press just a couple of years ago. Long project, took 14 years, actually. And that's not uncommon when you start working with a brand new biota that people haven't really worked with before. There weren't prior identification guides and so forth. So it was a lot of effort, and I'm really happy and proud to see that work published. Yeah, so lichens are colorful, they're abundant, they're beautiful, they're everywhere, and they stand out on the landscape because they've attracted the attention of humans for thousands of years. As we just mentioned, that the Tennessee and the Southern Appalachians and the Southeastern United States are a lichen biodiversity hotspot. So this isn't a foreign phenomenon to those of you who live there or live in and around the area. This thing out here, what is a lichen? All right, so it's a symbiosis between at least two completely unrelated organisms. Think of it as maybe you've got a digestive system, your gut, you've got bacteria living in your gut. Think about there would be no humanity without your gut bacteria. Well, that's effectively what we're talking about. It's an obligate symbiosis between a fungal partner, which gets called the mycobiont, and a photobiont, which is the photosynthetic partner, which is typically a green alga or a cyanobacterium. So it's a sandwich of sorts. Think about it like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, with the bread being the fungi and maybe the jelly or the peanut butter being the alga, which is obviously photosynthesizing and providing glucose and its products to the rest of the organism. Meanwhile, the sandwich, the bread that contains the algae provides a safe house in which to allow it to do its photosynthetic magic. Arrows aren't working on there. I should have just said that lichens have been looked at since the 1700s, obviously way before that, but that's our documentation. Early naturalists looked at lichens, but they did not understand them at all. Linnaeus, the father of modern classification, didn't like them. He called them the poor peasants of nature. And it wasn't until about the 1950s that lichens were becoming increasingly recognized as a fungus and an alga growing together in this unique symbiotic lifestyle. If we were to take a cross section through one of those leafy lobes like this, slice it again like a loaf of bread, you'd see that upper cortex, that's the fungal layer, and oftentimes the lower cortex, that's also the fungal layer. Right below the upper layer is the algal layer. That's where the photobiont lives. And then there's some other fungal tissue and all kinds of other organisms in there, actually, as we'll talk about in just a moment. Right now, in fact. In reality, we think of a lichen as a fungus plus an alga, but in any given single thallus, that's the thing that you see growing on trees, it may contain one or two species, or two species at minimum, but oftentimes it might contain 5, 10, or 15 different species of green algae, a few different species of fungus, and even totally unrelated domains of life. So taking us back to intro bio here we've got the tree of life. The eukaryotes are over here in the green. And there's two different lineages of bacteria. The true bacteria, that's this blue group, and then the archaea, that's this orange group. Things like thermophiles and bacteria that live in hot springs and all of that, that's in this orange group. Well, here's the fungi, and here the stem root of the algae, and then cyanobacteria. Those are the three key players in the lichen symbiosis. But you often get lots of other bacteria in both of these different domains of life. So suffice to say, you can look at one and think of it as an entire microcosm. It's a little universe of things getting along and maybe not getting along and doing all the things that you'd be doing if you had to live together forever. They also host all kinds of unique invertebrates, and it's just a whole microcosm. I'm going to skip this slide. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the types of photosynthetic partners. So this is backing up the green algae and so forth. They come in lots of different types and varieties. The most common of which is just a lichen that has this green algae. Often the genus of algae is called Trabuxia. It has a name. That's the genus. And those are the most common ones that you see very frequently throughout the Smokies and Tennessee as a whole. I'm sorry if I keep saying Smokies. I do mean the southeastern US. It's just I've spent a little too much time in those wonderful 858 square miles. So there are green algae that have carotenoids in their cells. What are carotenoids? You'll remember them as the pigment that gives carrots their color, all those oranges that we eat in nature. These green algae and the genus is Trentipolia contain carotenoids in their cells. They tend to occur at lower elevations and in tropical latitudes. Cyanobacteria are very distinct in that they're typically bluish, grayish, or blackish in color. This is the genus Fuscopinaria, a really beautiful genus that's all throughout the southeastern United States. You'll see it doing its job, taking over that liverwort in the background, as they often do. And then there's wild. It gets wild and more wild and more wild. Here's a single organism. That's the word thallus, Thallus. And that's got a polymorphic photobionts. In this case, there's green algae living in those green lobes, and there's a cyanobacterium living in these brown lobes. That's got a fancy name. Don't worry about it. It gets called photosymbiodemes. But let's just say if something out there can do something crazy, lichens have figured out how to do it. Here's another version of a tripartite, a three-way interaction. This is a fungus plus a green alga, excuse me. This is Peltidra leucophlebia. Again, these are all the pictures throughout the talk are minus maybe one or two are all from the area. You can find almost every one of them in Tennessee. They have these little specialized pockets of cyanobacteria. They get called cephalodia, and here they are hanging out on the surface. So there's three major organisms here. The significance of the cyanobacteria is that they fix nitrogen. So they take atmospheric nitrogen into and turn it into some organic form that's usable by other organisms, nitrates and so forth. All right, lichens have many different growth forms. There's one thing you've probably heard of, it's these growth forms, foliose and crustose and fruticose. So let's review that a little bit. For some reason, sometimes it likes my down arrow and sometimes it doesn't. Here is by the way, can you all see the full screen? Or I've got a picture of Karen covering up the Parmotrema subsumptum label. Karen, can you see the full screen?
I can see the whole thing. You can probably click on that image of me or move it up to a corner.
Poof, there you go. You'd think I'd be a Zoom expert by now, but apparently not. All right, here's foliose lichens. They're the most common ones that you see growing out on bark around the neighborhood and in the national parks, etc. They've got they're leaf-like. They have a differentiated upper cortex, see it's green, and a lower cortex, it's brown. They are leaf-like. That's the best way to identify a foliose lichen, just like it sounds. Okay, who's seen this one? Surely many of you. We gave it the name Crown Jewel of America. That's its common name that we came up with. It's Lobelia pulmonaria, emblematic of very high quality old growth forest. You will not see it in crappy environments. Fortunately, Tennessee has a lot of very nice places, so lots of opportunity to see Crown Jewel of America. All right, let's move on. Fruticose lichens are shrub-like. They do not have a differentiated lower and upper surface. So they're the same all the way around. Common genera are Cladonia, some of them Usnea, Ramalina. Again, all really common species in growth forms in your neck of the woods. Here's Usnea. You all know this. I'm not going to repeat the common name because I think it's stupid. So we gave them new common names. But you know this lichen, you see it everywhere. It's not a moss. It's not a plant. What is it? I don't know. I mean, it's a lichen. You know, it kind of defies classification even. By the way, I know at least half of you are wondering, what are the names based on? The names are based on the fungus only. We know on Earth, there's at least 20,000 species of fungi that participate in the lichen symbiosis. In contrast, names, we only have names for the algae for like a very small fraction, a couple hundred. Certainly that's not the case. We just don't know enough about the algae yet. And maybe 100 years from now, we will be classifying them in a different way, but that's where we are for now. So this is the genus Usnea. You probably got, I don't know, 20 or 30 species at least in Tennessee. Very abundant, important genus. All right. Well, most people know everything that we've been talking. They know the foliose lichens. They know the fruticose lichens. A lot of people tend to ignore the crustose lichens. And why is that a problem? I'll let you think about that for a second. You can chat it and see if Seth and Jacob shoot you an answer. It's a problem because crustose lichens in any given ecosystem comprise upwards of 70 to 75% of the total lichen diversity. So if you go anywhere, Alaska, Antarctica, Angola, most of the lichens that exist there are crustose, which is also the group of lichens that get ignored the most by scientists because there's this misconception that they're hard to know and hard to understand. They're not. You just have to put them under not just a dissecting scope, but a compound scope and do a little bit of extra work. But as you can see, they're beautiful and varied morphologically. They lack a lower cortex. So by definition, they are glued to the substrate. You can't remove them. To collect them, you have to collect pieces of the substrate. Like the species Tephramella atra, grows right on the rocks. You've got to chisel the rock to collect it and put it in the herbarium, which you can see as my backdrop. If you've never seen a herbarium, this is what these cases and drawers look like that we store specimens in. Most of you have probably seen herbaria 1 or 100 times in your life. All right. There's other forms. There's intermediates, as you might have guessed. Lichens do everything. You can appreciate that now. Here's squamulose lichens. They're somewhere between crustose and foliose. They have lots of little tiny lobes that makes them squamulose. Leprose lichens are just literally 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 algal cells wrapped in fungi, multiplied by millions. And that's exactly what a leprose lichen is. It actually doesn't even have a cortex. All right, here's your pop quiz. Growth form. All right, there's lots happening. You can't look at a branch anywhere in Tennessee and see only one species. I challenge you to find something that doesn't have that has only one species. So I'm talking about this bushy thing, not this thing, and then this bushy thing, not this thing. All right, those are fruticose lichens. That would be a crustose one here with the black dots on it. Growth form, Porpidia subsimplex. It's almost just fruiting bodies. It doesn't even have much of the rest of the organism, the thallus associated with it. Crustose. This one's pretty easy. Pseudocyphalaria aurata. Also, the name's pretty great, isn't it? Foliose. You can see it's got this beautiful yellow layer. See all these little holes that expose the yellow layer? That's the medulla. It's kind of in the middle of the lichen. That's a foliose species. Peltidra, also a foliose lichen. This one. Look, see, there's other things happening on this branch, I promised. Pseudovernia, that is a fruticose species. And this particular snapshot, which is probably, I don't know, that whole thing we're looking at is probably about a centimeter long from top to bottom. That's a crustose lichen with some more crustose chrysothrix in the background. I have 105 slides, but this is why we can get through them all, maybe. All right, what do lichens grow on and where are they found? Think in your head, do I have them in my yard? Maybe you do and you haven't noticed yet. So tomorrow morning with your cup of coffee, you can go lichenizing because you're fortunate to live in Tennessee. And they are everywhere. The answer is lichens grow on almost everything, and lichens are almost everywhere. They grow on anything that will sit still long enough. including Galapagos turtles, including you, if you don't get up and move around. Old rotting cars, they'll grow on anything as long as it doesn't move for a long enough time period. And we have all these fancy names. Bark-dwelling species, Corticulus. Soil-dwelling species, Terricolous. Rock, Saxicolous, Muscicolous, Foliacolous. Lichens that grow on leaves. Lichens that grow on rotting wood, Lignicolous. Lichens that grow on other lichens. Oh my God, how dare they? Well, they do. Lichenicolous lichens. They grow on detritus. They grow on regular fungi that are not lichens, and they grow on algae. So literally everything. I'll give you some examples of those. Here's a Corticulous species, Lepra trachythelina. You can see it just covering this twig. We call that Corticulous. Here's a Saxicolous lichen, a lichen on rock. Here's the genus Cladonia, which is one of the most diverse genera in the world. Very frequently grows on soil, so that's Terricolous. One's kind of easy. Here is a leaf. It's I think it might be dog gobble. It might be rhododendron, but I think it might be Leucothoe, the racemosa. And you'll see these little patches of lichens growing on the leaf surface. By the way, if you go anywhere in the world where it's wet, like the tropics, you'll see all kinds of foliaceous lichens. Might have to take a break. I'm sorry.
Thank you for trying so hard to make your way through this talk. We appreciate it.
Look at the chat for a minute with you. Hopefully that did it. Here's a species growing on lignum, so decaying wood, and lichens that grow on other lichens. This yellow species is Acarospora, and it's a parasite on this orange lichen, Caloplaca. So lichenicolous lichen. All right, I'll give you a moment to digest this one. It's still a lichenicolous species. See if you can find it. And there it is right here in the middle. See this little tiny thing? Growing on the thallus of stereocolon is Diploschistes. All right. My favorite topic, besides taxonomy, is reproductive biology of lichens. They're absolutely fascinating. And I hope to convey a little bit about the why. By the way, this is just a huge topic. People spend their lives studying it. There's no way to do the topic justice in just a few moments. But if you think about all the features of an organism, what does it look like? How high can it live? What's its physiology? How does it reproduce? What's its color? What's its chemistry? What's all of these features? There are plenty of people in the world that will tell you that there's no trait that is more impactful in terms of evolution of life as we have seen it than those related to reproduction. It's the reason we focus on flowers for flowering plants. It's the reason that if you study insects, you focus on genitalia. It's where natural selection happens, or natural selection happens in lots of places, but it's a source of evolutionary innovation. There's a lot of things happening because it's yeah, it determines population level processes, right? Survival of the fittest. It determines the whole name of the game is getting your genome out there in the world and spreading your genome on and on and on. So major patterns in the history of this planet can be explained by the evolution of reproductive traits. In lichens, a given genus often contains both sexually reproducing members and asexually reproducing members. Wow, what's all that mean? Well, think back to basic biology again. We've got mitosis and meiosis, right? Meiosis is the making of egg cells and sperm cells and whatever the reproductive things are. Versus asexual reproduction would be your strawberry plants making little stolons and propagating via vegetative means, or out here aspen trees that grow clonally in huge colonies. That has nothing to do with meiosis. That's literally just cellular division, plain old mitosis. So the best I can describe it would be, imagine scratching your arm and some skin cells flaking off, and those skin cells get blown away, land on a tree, and grow a whole new you. Thank God we can't do that as humans, but lichens can, and they're extremely successful at it. So that's asexual reproduction. It's a way of getting your genome out there into the world, and they're very successful. In fact, they've invented lots and lots of different ways of reproducing, both sexually and asexually. So I'm not going to dwell on this slide. It's a little heavy, but the fungus can reproduce sexually and asexually. The algae, in theory, can reproduce both ways, but for whatever reason, inside of the lichen, it only reproduces asexually. Maybe some function of controlled parasitism, or when these things occur free living out in nature, they may undergo sexual reproduction, but they don't do it inside of the lichen, which is curious. All right, let's look at some examples of these different modes of reproduction. What do they look like in nature? Here is Lechinora. God, might be the most diverse genus of lichens in North America. These discs, you guys see these all the time out and about. Start looking, you'll see them everywhere. These are where meiosis happens, sexual reproduction. These are typical ascomycete fungi, most of them. So they reproduce like any other ascomycete fungus. And you can have a think about that, or we can talk about that later. But in any case, there are these structures, and that's where these ascospores form. These are fungal only spores, and they disperse and they go find a new alga. Maybe they both land on the same tree and they're suitable partners. Bam, lo and behold, you grow a new lichen. Typical sexual reproduction in fungi. Nothing different about that here. Here's a beautiful species, Arthenia kermesina. We named it several years ago. It is endemic to the Southern Appalachians and almost entirely found in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. A few instances outside of the park. And you only find it on spruce, and you only find it on really old spruce, and you only find it above 5,000 feet. There's so many things that tell that same story, which is why that national park is so special. There's the preservation of old growth forests like nowhere else left in Eastern North America. Well, the lichens know it, and they'll tell you if you take time to look at them. Little tiny red dots. We named this one hot dots. I had a grad student a few years ago that dressed up like it for Halloween. True story. Here's a cross section. Think of like cutting a loaf of bread through one of these fruiting bodies, one of these disc-like structures. When you do that, this is what you see. Oftentimes you'll see algae in the margin, but then there's this whole section which is only fungal material, and that's where these fungal spores form. There's usually 8 in a sac. That's the ascus, hence ascomycete fungi. All right, here is another example of these apothecia. These are these disc-like structures, open, broad discs, sexually reproducing. You find this genus in areas that have some base qualities, base soils, base rocks, basic rocks. Think about more calcareous habitats. So lichens also are very preferential in terms of their substrates that they grow on. Again, more apothecia. You can see it in 2 cases, this vulpicida. And this is probably, I don't know, Rhizocarpon infernulum or something down here. Well, evolutionarily, those disc-like apothecia, at some point, some of them, some lineages became flask-like. So think about millions of years, something like this becoming something like that. They have a little pore at the top through which the spores are released. And this has evolved hundreds of times in lichens. And here's what those look like. These are still sexually reproducing structures, parathecia, but yeah, they have a little tiny pore at the top and they're shaped like the thing on the right rather than open and flat like the thing on the left. Here's the genus Arthropyrenia. Looks like a lichen. Would you believe me if I told you that, again, evolutionarily, this lineage has lost its photobiome. So it actually gets treated along with lichens, but it's actually not lichenized. So it's actually just a regular old fungus, but it still looks like a lichen because it hasn't been long enough for it to look like anything else. More examples of parathecia. Wow, there's lots of forms, lots of colors, yellows, reds, blacks, almost things that look purple. You tend to get, like that orange alga Trentipolia, you tend to get parathecia lichens at lower latitudes. So we find these on south-facing slopes at low altitudes throughout Tennessee. And as you get towards Florida, you start seeing more and more lichens that have parathecia instead of apothecia or are asexually reproducing. Okay. Take a breath. Now we're moving on. Now we're into the skin scratching scenario of scratch your skin cells fly off, land. If it's suitable habitat, start growing a new you. Lichens are really good at it. And like I told you, they've invented lots of ways of doing that. Here's a structure called Soridia. Again, this is just mitosis, just like your fingernails growing, just like your gallbladder making more gallbladder cells or your heart making more heart cells or whatever. That's just mitosis. That's what we're talking about here. Soridia, along with the next type of structure, are the most common and widespread types of asexual lichenized reproductive propagules. That's some big language, but I think you get the point. Again, just think of a few algal cells wrapped in fungal hyphae, and then these things bursting up from the center of the lichen and getting dispersed with the wind or other dispersal agents. Here's another Soridia lichen, asexually reproducing. For a very long time, these things lacked names. People didn't know what to do with them because without spores, i.e. without the flowers, we didn't know how to classify them. Imagine having just green plants in nature that didn't produce flowers or fruits. It'd be a lot harder to place them, right? Taxonomically. Well, that's our problem when we go to the tropics. There's been many botanists that have called the tropics a green hell because in fact, when you go there, there's so many things that just are green and sterile and it's really difficult. So you come up with all these other tricks and ways to identify plant families. Well, we have that same phenomenon in lichens, but here we're in the North America and the United States of America and not the tropics. Well, nowadays we use sequencing and chemistry and all kinds of techniques, and we're starting to name these sterile soridiate crusts a lot more frequently than, say, even 20 or 30 years ago. Here, this is from my backyard. You guys can do this much quicker than I can. I live in arid, mountainous Colorado. I just took microscope slides, left them out in my backyard, and let them sit out there for about 6 months. Throughout the snowy season into the spring, lo and behold, here's these algal cells, right? Surrounded by this hyaline clear stuff. This is the fungal layer. These are Soridia. So if you put microscope slides or really any piece of glass or something like that out in your backyards and come back 4 or 5 months later, maybe even, I don't know, things grow fast there a month later in the growing season, you can have these. And you can find these as well. All right, those were Soridia. Here is the other most common type of asexual reproductive structure. These are called Isidia. And you'll see they're just little columns, little towers. They stick up. Unlike Soridia, which do not have a cortex, which is like an organized fungal layer, these are highly corticate. So it's just an extension of the thallus. So they have this very organized fungal layer. They come in all kinds of shapes and sizes, which I'm trying to show down here in the bottom right. Yeah, interestingly, they also increase the surface area of the lichen besides serving as a reproductive structure. You can think of all the things that that might mean. You know, there's more surface area to intercept atmospheric particles or trace gases or aerosols. There's more surface area to photosynthesize, right? There's lots of possibilities. These things are doing something. Here's an isidiate, very common isidiate species in the southeast, Canoparmelia caroliniana. You can see all those columnar structures. I'll give you a moment with this one. Why would you stop with Ceridia and Isidia if you could invent 14 other ways to spread your genome in the world asexually? In fact, that's exactly what lichens have done. So think of it as the lichen symbiosis itself has fostered many innovations in reproductive structures. So these are squamules or phyllidia, little kind of branched leaf-like structures on the margins. And then there's all this other stuff, phyllidia, pycnidia, sporodocia, blastidia, lobules, schizidia, blah, 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 blah. They can do it all of those ways. Crazy, right? All right, we're back to the pop quiz. You guys have to chat your answer, or I'm not going to go on to the next slide. What is it? How does it reproduce? Is it sexual or asexual?
I'm gonna say asexual.
Oh, we're 1 and 1. We got to have a couple more votes.
Asexual.
This one's kind of hard. What's an untypical lichen? Well, they're all untypical unless you know them. How about that, Jane? Ask your politicians that question. Yeah, okay. This is an asexual species. It just so happens that those Ceridia are organized in little pockets that have their own term, of course, Ceralia. But anyway, this is an asexual species, Biator appalachensis. Next, this is a pretty one, Leptogium corticula.
Yeah, asexual.
Sexual, right? Those discs. You guys think that this has a green algal photobiont or a cyanobacterium photobiont?
It's like green.
Well, the green moss certainly is a member of the plant lineage. This would be a cyanobacterium, not a green alga, because it's got that gray darkish color. The genus Nostoc, N-O-S-T-O-C, is very common.
Okay.
Remember the cardinal rule, you can't show a picture of lichens from Tennessee and see only one species, right? I told you I didn't lie. Look, here's another one down here. It's crustose overgrowing moss. All right, onwards. Sexual or asexual. Also a cyanobacterial lichen. So this is one of the ones that fixes nitrogen. This is an asexual species. Those are isidia, those columnar structures, kind of finger-like. That's not a very good photo. Didn't I tell you that we took most of the photos, but not all? Okay, if it's a bad photo, I didn't take it, right? Get it? Okay, this is an asexual species. Here are these little pockets of Ceridia. This one's easy. Look for this one up high on Sorbus. Loxospora ochrafea, sexual.
Yeah.
Still not lying. There's at least 2 lichens in this picture. A bright one of which, Lechinora, that genus that's super diverse taxonomically. Sexual. What are those things? Hint, hint. The name is in the specific epithet, the name of the species. They're squamules. Heterodermia squamulosa makes squamules. So that's asexual. That's a pretty one. What do you guys think about that? You guys have seen this? I bet you have. This is a really, really common lichen. Graphis scripta. It's a good name, isn't it? This is a sexually reproducing species. These are essentially just apothecia that have become elongated evolutionarily. So for whatever reason, there was a mutation and it resulted in slightly longer. And then that thing was favorable in the environment. And then it got selected. And then the longer ones kept getting selected. And so these are apothecia. They have a fancy name called lyrally, but they are sexual structures. Oh, here's a tricky one. All right, if you said asexual, the answer would be you're correct. That's these isidia. And if you said sexual, the answer would be also correct. Here's these apothecia, these disc-like structures. Well, in fact, what do we have? One way of getting our genome into the next generation. Most things have one or two. A lot of plants might have commonly they can reproduce sexually and asexually. Again, think about clonal aspen trees if you just tuned in, or strawberries with their any kind of creeping plant, really. Well, lichens can do it at least 27 different ways. We wrote a paper about that several years ago. And they can do it via fungal only propagules. That's in this upper half, modes 27 through 14, or they can do it with lichenized propagules, which is the fungus plus the alga together. Please don't try to digest that right now. I'm just trying to use that to illustrate. And what is so interesting is that mode of reproduction is clearly tied to species identity. And it looks like very oftentimes we have two sister taxa, so two species that are each other's closest relatives in a phylogeny. I don't have any pictures of a phylogeny here, but you guys probably know what I'm talking about. One of which might be sexually reproducing, and the other which might be asexually reproducing. Down below, hypogymnia in curvoides, you can see these ceridia on the tips of the lobes. And these are each other's closest relatives, such that divergence in the way that you reproduce is tied to a speciation event. From one ancestor, we get two descendant species through reproductive evolution. And that's happened thousands of times in the lichen symbiosis, which is wonderful. And I told you I wasn't lying, that reproductive biology is one of the most interesting aspects of lichenology and life as a whole, not just lichens. Anyway, that gets called species pairs. And we've got good genetic evidence that that's the case in many different lineages of lichens. All right, we're moving on to a couple other things. Most lichens are lichenized. They have a photobiont and a mycobiont. They have an algal partner, and they've got the fungal partner. Okay, that's why we call them lichens. But as I alluded to about 10 minutes ago, there are several lineages that have actually lost their photobiont altogether. For whatever reason, it's now gone, and it just persists in the world as fungal material only. So there's lots of non-lichenized species that just get treated with lichens because we're the lichenologists, or the people that pick them up and collect them and name them and describe them. All right. People like to ask, why are lichens important? When I first moved to Colorado and published that White Rocks field guide out here, I did a little interview on Colorado public radio. It's called Colorado Matters. And it's a really popular little news show on NPR. And the host here, Nathan Heffel, he said, he just really wanted to know. He kept asking me, why are lichens important though? Why are they important? Eventually I just say, why are you important? And he just laughed, but it's a good question to think about, right? Things are doing things that are important, whether we know it or not. Your worst enemy on the planet probably has some function. You might just not know about it yet, but they've probably done something, or they probably have good intentions. Well, so too, lichens are important, even if we don't fully understand them. They benefit ecosystems in so many different ways. They facilitate fundamental ecological processes like nutrient cycling that provide shelter and food to animals and other organisms that are not animals. They break down parent rock material. We'll talk about that in a minute. They provide habitat. They prevent habitat desiccation, so drying out, and so many other things. The list is really long. Lichen ecologists study this topic very thoroughly and have for years. So nutrient cycling, we know that lichens participate in the nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus cycle, carbon cycling, sulfur cycling, so forth and so on. Blurry photo, I warned you, not mine. If it's blurry, keep that in mind. Lichens cover, that's a joke, by the way, you're supposed to laugh. Lichens can cover in some habitats up to 97% of ground surfaces, constituting a huge fraction of the nutrients in a given ecosystem. Here's the genus Cladonia. I took a picture on the side of a tepui in northern South America in Guyana many years ago, but clearly being a dominant component of the ground layer. This is why at Arctic latitudes, they're the primary food source for reindeer, even in other places. So lichens break down parent rock material and can be the first organisms to recolonize destroyed habitats. Okay, think about a lichen living in very close association with a rock. They have these little things called hyphae. It's just pieces of the fungus that start to penetrate the rock. Lichens manufacture at least 1,000 different compounds that no other group of organisms produce. Some of those compounds function in breaking down parent rock material into smaller particles that are usable by other organisms. So think of it as weathering, right? You have a rock, and through time, with enough whatever, rainfall or lichens or whatever, breaks that stuff down into soils. And that's where soils come from: biological, chemical, and physical weathering. It takes a very long time for soil to form. That's why people get really upset when you go and harm soils, right? You take off the top 12 inches of loam in the Midwest. Well, you need to wait another 1,000 years for that to form back. So destroying a landscape through development is extremely detrimental, and it takes, hundreds to thousands of years for things like lichens to come in and turn whatever's left into tiny particles that other organisms can make use of, that other things can start moving in and colonizing. So one classic example is of a zinc smelter in the state of Pennsylvania that was completely devastated, totally obliterated, no signs of life after it operated for many, many decades. The mining operations, or it's not mining, but the smeltering operations eventually came to a close. The land was vacated. It literally looked like a dust bowl. And lo and behold, scientists showed that some of the first organisms to move back into that highly devastated, destroyed habitat were lichens. And then 5 years later, other things moved in. And then 5 years later, other things moved in. So lichens can help break down rocks and make the environment usable for other organisms after habitat destruction, which we're really good at, as you all know. Lichens retain and regulate humidity. There's no better place on Earth to see that than where you all live. This impacts other organisms, the trees, the everything, the invertebrate community, you name it. And data show this. Lots of people have studied this. So you think about an environment that didn't have lichens in it, and it would be much more prone to desiccation, right? Drying out. It wouldn't be able to micro-regulate and retain the moisture needed to sustain other life. Well, lichens play a huge role in that. In the Arctic latitudes, there are lots of brown lichens. This is actually the pigment melanin. And it's been shown that these brown lichens elevate local temperatures in the springtime, facilitating snowmelt and thereby escalating, or I should say, accelerating spring growth and metabolism. You know that the growing season at Arctic latitudes is really, really short. Well, lichens help expedite by expediting snowpack. In dry places, lichens contribute to water holding capacity of ecosystems. This is a picture from the Namib Desert in Namibia. Lichens feed animals from reindeer to snails. People have studied that. Can you imagine? Yep. Folks get paid to do this, to study snails grazing on lichens, pooping it out, and identify what species of lichens and where they're traveling to. Well, yep, there's someone to do every job on the planet. And from reindeer to snails and lots of other things too. There's whole lineages of insects that feed only on specific species of lichens. Here is one of these lichen moths. We actually have a grad student here at University of Colorado that studies this group of moths and their interaction with lichens. They provide soft antimicrobial materials for nests. No organisms do this better than hummingbirds all over the world. Lichens are preferred nesting materials. Probably again, in part because of their compounds that they produce, which are antimicrobial. Here's a cool picture. These are not mine, these next few. Lichen spiders camouflage themselves to help capture prey. Here it is, right in the middle. This is a Trentipolia lichen, one of those orange ones, this crusto species. Here's a little tiny mite living under the lobe of a lichen. Here is a grasshopper mimicking the genus Xanthoparmelia. So dynamic interactions with invertebrates on all scales, from camouflage to microinvertebrates that live within lichen thalli. I had a grad student last year who studied these microinvertebrates in the Smokies. Hopefully she'll be publishing that paper soon. Here's a katydid mimicking the genus, again, Usnea, and so forth. So I'm almost done here, but my point here is to show you a couple different slides to compare and contrast. This is a landscape we're all too familiar with throughout the southeastern United States. This is the Coosa Wildlife Management Area in Alabama. We showed up there to do field work one day and we quickly turned around. There wasn't much left to do. You can see it's been clear cut now, and it was also clear cut pretty recently. Look how small the trees are, right? That just no opportunity to regenerate an ecosystem, which, as you know, can take a very long time. Here's what we find in much of the Southeast, and especially in and around the mountainous Southern Appalachians. Here's a picture from Baxter Creek, which is where I got my start with lichens. I've got a long-term plant ecology plot here that I have data from. I'm supposed to be there right now collecting data, but I'm not. We started this plot in 2006, so we've got 15 plus years of data just on kind of plant habitat change through time. But yeah, there's a difference between that one and this one for sure. The health of the overall ecosystem. So basically, I challenge you, wherever you go on the planet, to walk into the environment and say, do I see any lichens there? Do I see this or do I see that? And if you see this, you know you're in a healthy environment. For example, pull over on the corridor of I-95 anywhere in the mid-Atlantic states up into the Northeast and walk into the forest. It's so polluted with fumes and traffic and industry, you're going to see very little of that and a lot more of that. When you see this, you know there's lichens, and when you see lichens, you know there's other high quality aspects of the overall ecosystem. By the way, look at these rocks. We take this for granted, but this is a real phenomenon. There used to be so many exposed rocks in the entirety of Eastern North America. And, you know, I don't know, the statistic is something like less than 4% of native habitat remains east of the Mississippi River. So whereas we used to have all these lichens that grew on rocks all throughout the East Coast, north to south, we have records from 1900 of lichens growing on rocks that now don't exist anywhere except for in places like Great Smoky Mountains National Park. That's the only place where there are these intact rock outcrops that are not completely destroyed and turned into a Dollar General parking lot or whatnot. It's kind of sad, but it's true. And herbarium records, the stuff behind me, shows that better than nothing else. We can make distribution maps of all of these species based on their occurrences in 1905 and their occurrences now, and it's dramatically different. So do night lichens need protection? I won't say too much about this other than the obvious. Yes, there's very few places on Earth where lichens are protected. Very, very, very few. Here's one example. Colleague and I, Kyle Dexter, have spent quite a bit of time working throughout Namibia and Angola on a group of plants that occur there in the plant family that I study. And they actually have this whole section of the skeleton coast called the lichen fields, and it's under conservation protection. This is one of the driest places on earth. It never rains like at all. If there's any moisture input, it's from coastal fog. That you'll see these organisms doing just fine. And that thing might be 100 years old on that pebble right here. Look how delicate the soils are. Well, in the United States, we only have two, not 50, not 70, not 17, but 2 species of lichens protected under the Endangered Species Act. Out of how many? In North America as a whole, there's about 5,700 species of lichens. So this is pitiful, to say the least. One of which is here in the Southern Appalachians at Cetradonia linearis. The other is endemic to Florida. That's Cladonia perforata. Yet there are hundreds, not 10, not 20, not 30, not 40, but hundreds of species, particularly in and around the national parks of the Southern Appalachians, that are in need of conservation protection. These are species that basically have no habitat left anywhere in the world, not just North America, anywhere in the world, except for, say, in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. It is that special. Ainsia americana, Usnea, actually I meant to put a different Usnea in there, Cladonia appalachensis. Here's a species we named for one of the educators in the park, Susan Sachs, Lecanora saxiana. There's so many that are in need of conservation protection, but thank God for national parks. That's all I can say. This is especially the case in the southeastern US, which is a hotspot of lichen biodiversity, which includes hundreds of rare species. So lichens in some are some of the most beautiful components of our ecosystems, yet are among the least protected of any group of organisms. I don't know, we can start a movement, Lichen Lives Matter. How about that? More lichens occur in Great Smoky Mountains National Park than in any other national park in the United States by a long shot. When we first started working there, there were 400 species on the checklist. And within, that was in 2005. And then in 2000, and now, I mean, there's over 1,000 species there now. So not just doubling, but more than doubling the park's checklist. These are all members of the genus Cladonia. British soldiers, which if you have the field guide, you'll see we also renamed that one. Oops. And that's only 858 square miles, the national park, representing almost a fifth of all lichens in the entire North American landmass. By far and away, habitat destruction is the biggest cause of species losses worldwide. I'll just leave you with this image from Purchase Knob, which is where the field station is, high in the Smokies on the North Carolina side, unfortunately, but just as pretty on the Tennessee side. But just a reminder, we can all do our parts to help preserve open space, because once it's gone, it really is gone. I just want to take a few slides to acknowledge my collaborators. Closest collaborator on understanding the biota of the area is James Lindemer, who New York Botanical Garden. We had a big project working throughout the Southern Appalachians, Virginia to Alabama recently. Christy McCain at University of Colorado was very instrumental in that as well. Here's Christy. We were joined by lots of students along the way. Carly Anderson is one of my graduate students. Again, you could think about the drastic kinds of habitat present around the Dollar General store or around this little birding lookout in North Alabama versus, say, on the side of a mountain. Look at all these exposed rocks. You don't find that outside of parks anymore. Used to be everywhere. Here's a sandstone glade in Western Alabama. Nolan Kane was also an instrumental colleague in some of the genomic work. And here's a couple of grad students working with us, Kristen White and Kyle Keepers. We did most of this work via traveling laboratories that we would set up and stay at for several weeks at a time. And here's a look at probably about a month's worth of field work and the specimen accumulation. So we would just go collecting all day and set up microscopes and thin layer chromatography and let the specimens sit out to dry in rooms and so forth. Thanks to Karen Thomas for loaning us your mountain cabin in those photos. We've done a lot of other genomic work to understand genomic evolution within the lichen symbiosis, and we won't talk about that at all. But just to thank funding from the National Science Foundation, and I've had, boy, a heck of a lot of support from, my opinion, the best herbarium, certainly at any university herbarium in the United States. That's the University of Colorado, right here where I'm sitting. And we've just got a wonderful set of staff members that have been really instrumental in helping us understand and process all of these collections and spread the word. Again, if you'd like to pick up a copy, you can buy it wherever. I know it's online, but the photos again were from this book. And that's all I have. You guys know the thing on the right. Now you know the thing on the left. That's cool. Happy to take any questions. I'm glad I stopped coughing. My goodness.
Wonderful. This was delightful. Thank you.
Sure. I see that Seth and Jacob have been fielding lots of questions along the way. If folks just want to, I don't care about raising hands. Like, we don't need to do that, right? We just unmute and ask a question if you'd like, please do.
Erin, I'll start. My name's Hill Craddock. I actually teach mycology. I shouldn't admit this to you, at the University of Tennessee. But I wish I knew more about lichens. And I tell my students every year, I said, I just don't know enough about lichens to really talk about them.
You do now.
Well, I'm gonna have to buy your book. No, but I use the book by, what is it, Brodo and the Keys, and we have fun with lichens. I have to say, we have fun with lichens in lab. We've got a cemetery across the street from campus here, downtown Chattanooga, in the middle of the urban area.
Yeah.
And I would guess on an afternoon, we found about 30 species of lichens.
I'm not surprised. Yeah.
In the cemetery. It was really fun as an exercise. No, my question for you is about chipping off pieces of rock.
Gravestone, don't do it.
No.
Please don't.
and no, but really,
I got in trouble from that one time by a park ranger, maybe. I don't know.
No, don't confess. But I see the herbarium behind you. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit. You showed one picture of your field work. You showed some of those paper pouches. How do you curate? How do you store and catalog a specimen in the museum?
Sure, that's a great question. So when we come back, whoever goes out collecting, whether it's one of my students or whoever, immediately bring your brown paper bags back, and they go into these white packets. Or you can do it however you want. It's how I do it. Here's a packet. I label it with my collection number. Hold on, let me get a better one. That one's kind of.
And that's the classic herbarium fold. You just fold up a sheet of paper? Or
Yeah, well, that's very particular. People have their own way of folding the
Uh-huh,
paper. You
uh-huh.
can tell like what herbarium you work at by the way you fold your paper. But anyway, just put it in a paper. There's your collection number, Sax. I'm just reminding myself it's Saxicolus, grows on rocks. My tentative field debt umbilicaria Crashininakovii. Yeah, and then here's what the specimen looks like. Here's one that I was working on recently. Let's see if I can do this without making a mess. So there's little pieces of rock, and here's the specimen. And what we often do is immediately section it and look at the spores if it's sexual. And we write down how big the spores are, what color they are, the chemical spot tests, and some other relevant stuff. And then once we get a name on it, it gets into the queue to get accession. So these are type specimens. I'm going to grab one from over there so you can see what that looks like. Those are mosses. We'll skip those. So here's kind of what a drawer might look like that has accession lichen specimens in it. And if I just pull out, here's one actually that I collected in 2017. I'll show you what the label looks like. Just kind of like a herbarium label. So this one says, I can't read it on the screen, but Rhinodyna perina, lichens of Alabama. You'll see down here the collector and number and the date. and information about the habitat, the precise location, so forth and so on. And then if you open up the packet, here it is. It's just 2 little twigs. It's the entire specimen. And that might be a big specimen depending on what species we're talking about. So we have one of the biggest, largest lichen herbaria here in the country. Definitely not the biggest. That would be like several other institutions, but we've got a lot of material here. So I hope.
No, that's very helpful. It's encouraging to see, because I like the paper fold and it just seems so archaic. But to see the premier lichen collection in the world is held in paper folded pouches. That's fascinating to me. Are they cataloged phylogenetically or chronologically?
They're cataloged via a barcode that we attached. I said we, I mean students who have done all of this incredible work. I've sat on my lazy butt looking in microscopes, but we've got lots of hardworking undergrads and grad students that digitize the specimens. So they put a barcode on it. They take an image of it. Those images are online. They georeference it, all of that stuff to make these data available to the world so that some ecologist, a fire ecologist or whoever can use this information in their research. Sometimes, a lot of times, specimens get used in phylogenetics as well for genetic research. Just depends on the researcher. We get requests every week. Hey, will you sample this thing for me so I can include it in my analysis?
Wonderful. I can't see the chat very well. Bettina, can you read some of the chat questions, please?
I can read them. There's lots. So Gus asked, what would you say are the most medicinally significant species or even potentially medicinal? Yeah, Seth answered, probably region dependent, unfortunately, I would say many lichens have not been exploited for their potential uses. There's definitely a set of researchers around the world that study them, pharmacologists. There's lots of people that have shown anti-carcinogenic properties. So, but there's no they grow a little bit slowly. There's no widespread kind of efforts to cultivate any of them yet. But I think the potential there is pretty tremendous. It just hasn't been unlocked yet. Like I said, at least 1,000 different compounds are manufactured by the lichen symbiosis alone, nowhere else on the planet. So if you were to separate the fungus and the algae, you would not get that compound. They have to be growing together. So I think there's probably a lot of traditional uses by native peoples around the world, but not so much. Oh, they get used to flavor alcohol beverages in Scandinavia, which is kind of funny. But leave it to Scandinavia. They actually teach lichenology to their 5-year-olds, which is pretty amazing. So they're ahead of the times, Norwegians and so forth.
Well, you've certainly opened our eyes in a wonderful way to what's going on with lichens. I'm really amazed. This was an exceptionally good presentation. Thank you, Erin.
Good. It was
I know
fun.
you struggled with your voice, but we do appreciate it.
It was fun for me to put together because it's just a slideshow and you don't even have to have words. You don't even have to think about what you're going to say. It's just, there's the thing, and there's enough to talk about. So
yes. Now I know tomorrow's field trip here in the Smokies, what we're going to be looking at.
yeah, exactly.
Take your book with us.
If you don't have it already, make sure it's very helpful when you're looking at lichens to take a hand lens. Probably a lot of botanists, I'm one too, have 10x hand lenses. I highly recommend a 14x hand lens. The 20x's are a little bit too much, that you just have to be in a bright environment. There's not enough light passing through the tiny, but 14 is a really nice compromise. And you can see a lot with these in the lichen world.
The area of the Smokies that we were visiting today was part of the area that was burned a few years back. Do you think the lichens possibly helped protect some of the trees since they hold some moisture?
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, especially God in the Smokies, Like if you took a tree and took all the lichens and bryophytes off of it, mosses and so forth, wow, that'd be a very different environment for sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It probably burned a lot faster.
Oh,
a lot.
exactly. I'm sure. Think resilient. When you think of an environment that has all this stuff in it that makes it hard to walk through, it's resilient. It's better off than one without it.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's see. Dylan asks, as far as identifying lichen species in the Southeast, other than Brodo, what would you say? Would you say the book is the best? Like, yeah, absolutely. I'm not trying to promote it. I don't care. I make almost nothing off of it. Royalty would be like, maybe I get a check for $14 a year. But by far, because it has so many species, even though we only picture like, what is it, like 600 or something? We only have, 3/4 of them or so in the actual the pages. But the dichotomous keys in the back cover all 909 species at the time of writing. So it's by far the most comprehensive for the Southeast as a whole. Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful.
Yeah. So.
And I know for those that may not have realized it, many years ago when it was time for printing, we were one of the organizations that were requested to assist with some of the expenses. And I know we sent a check.
You did.
Have
I don't
no
think I
idea
was
how much.
informed of that. Thank you so much. Well, my gratitude to the Tennessee Native Plant Society. We do similar stuff here in the herbarium. I'm not surprised, but I don't think anyone in the publishing office ever told me that. I'm looking at the book.
Probably
Usually,
not.
usually you include the logos of people that donated. And that's not anywhere in this book. So yeah, thanks to you all for supporting it. That's great. Wonderful.
And we had a break on the price of the book for the first round
Got it.
for a while. So that was a lot of fun. That's why so many of us do have the book. I don't know how many like me have had it sitting on the shelf going, well, I need to look at this and this and this first, and I've got this on my plate.
So we do have a really nice introduction on general lichen biology, as well as kind of history of the Smoky stuff. So if that's of interest, it's not too long or detailed, but there's a good 20 or 30 pages or something like that. Jenna asked where you can get it. So not that I'm promoting Amazon by any stretch of the imagination, but you can certainly buy it there. I think you can buy it from the publisher as well. And look, someone else just provided a link, Appalachian Mountain Books. Oh yeah, it's on sale. Do that. Good deal.
That's the same problem, hasn't
Can I ask how you got your start and became interested in studying lichens?
Yeah. Do I still have a slide in here? Let's see. That's such a great question, actually. Let me see. Am I still screen sharing?
Yes.
Okay, here it is. I have a slide for you. Was that Jenna? Who was that? All right. Well, I got I did my undergrad at UNC Asheville. I wanted to get the heck out of Dodge when I left high school. My parents were in Northern Alabama. They may or may not be online right now, but promised not to talk. But I wanted to get far enough and go to somewhere amazing and beautiful. So I did my undergrad at UNC Asheville, which is about a 6-hour drive from North Alabama, where I lived. And my colleague and so I romped around the forest all the time there like crazy. But throughout grad school, and I went to grad school at Duke, I was already a botanist at that point. I was doing my PhD on a group of tropical plants. But I had spent enough time in the Southern Appalachians at that point through my undergrad years that I was always really, really intrigued by lichens. I looked at them all the time. You're one of those people where you want to have a name for every weed that you find. Well, that's what I wanted. I wanted to know the names of everything. And so my colleague Kyle and I started this long-term plot in Baxter Creek. It's about a mile up the trail. It's actually the tallest canopy in Eastern North America. The Eastern Native Tree Society has measured it. And it's in Baxter Creek, north-facing slopes. And we started this plot. It's 1 hectare. We go there the third week of almost every April, collect a bunch of data just to look at change through time. Well, in one case in 2006, we started collecting the lichens there too, because I'm like, all right, we got to figure out what every species is in this plot. And when we did and started trying to name them, lo and behold, in 1 hectare, that's a tiny plot of land, we found 141 species. Take me to any other hectare anywhere in the United States and find 141 species of plants. It would be really hard to do. Well, lo and behold, in that 1 hectare, there's 141 species of lichens, of which 7 of them were new to science, and 50 of them were new reports for the national park. Here's just a few of them that we named down below. So that got me really going in the Smokies as a whole. And that was my start, I guess, in Southeastern lichenology. I brought in my colleague, James, who was working in the Northeast at the time. And I'm like, hey, you got to come see this. And yeah, that was the start of the love affair, I guess.
Erin, we don't see the slide.
I just took that. I just got rid of it.
Oh, I'm sorry. You were gonna show us the slide. We didn't see it.
Wait, you didn't see it at all?
No, we didn't see it.
Oh, geez. There, I'll just do it real quick. Oh, that's really weird. Can you guys see that now?
There, yes.
There you go. I'm sorry.
Wow.
So anyway, it basically just says what I just said. So yeah, and you guys know what, you live there, you know what it's like. Can't navigate anywhere around your habitats without seeing lichens everywhere. So yes, it's true. Mosses do grow on the nice north side of the trees. Lichens typically prefer the south faces, but not always. It's opposite if you go to the southern hemisphere.
Ah, intriguing. Are there any more questions? Ooh.
Yeah. Well, if you have other questions, then please do feel free to speak up, sign off. I am not in a rush. I'm happy to stick around for a few more minutes. Here's my email address. Welcome to send me a message.
Well, I know some people probably need to sign off, and that's okay. Go ahead, and those that want to stick around with questions, please do so.
Thanks to you all for coming. I appreciate your time, willingness to learn a little bit about lichens.
Thank you so very much, Erin. This has been delightful. You have a huge following, apparently. There was quite an attendance record here tonight. So
Good, spread the word.
we will.
It's like a religion, just a little different. Similar concept.
It is. My first introduction to lichens was standing at the school bus stop. Well, long time ago. And there was gravel and such on the side of the road, and waiting for the bus. I was looking around and poking around at everything, and I found some of the soldier lichens with the red on the top, and they fascinated me. So I grabbed a handful, just a little bit, and took with me to school. And I went into the science teacher and said, "What is this?" That was when I first fell in love with lichens. So they're amazing. They are amazing.
And I feel anybody else have any other questions?
I just wanted to say that I'm going to the spring wildflower pilgrimage down in the Smokies next week. And I'm very sorry that I didn't sign up for a lichen class.
Well, who are you going with? Are you
Oh.
going on David's walk or Sean's walk or who's?
No, it's called the spring wildflower pilgrimage. They do it every year.
Yeah, who's leading it is what I was.
Oh, Joey Shaw.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, just ask Joey. He knows enough about lichens. He'll show you some.
I might have to add myself into a class.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for introducing us to this.
Thanks for being open ears to them. Yes.
Sure.
They say thank you, really, not me.
All right. Well, everybody,
I'm sorry. I was
Go
going
ahead.
to ask, are there STEM programs out there for children who are younger, and going into high school level? 'Cause, so that they're not waiting until college level to find out about this type of work?
Well, I wish that I could respond by saying you get this in college, but the answer is you don't. It's not really part of any curriculum in the United States, and it's super unfortunate. For me to be able to recruit a graduate student that wants to study lichens almost means that they've been self-trained in lichenology, because we don't teach it anywhere in this country. There's a few courses. I made a college course But at the high school level, nothing. At the elementary level, no, definitely not. You might get one biology teacher occasionally in some high school in some state that has been exposed to them and mentions them in one of their lectures. But no, to my knowledge, there's no targeted any kind of STEM programs for our youth. That's what I was trying to draw the contrast. There's not a child that goes through school in Finland or Norway or Sweden or any of those kinds of Nordic places that doesn't know what a lichen is by the time they're 8 years old or whatever. It's just a totally different I guess educational values. But yeah, I'm not aware of any. But if you learn of any, please do let me know. I'd be interested in that. And there's only plus or minus 10 people actively studying lichens in the United States. So.
Well, if you know Joey, you know that maybe we need to talk with him and make sure he includes it in the Tennessee, Kentucky Native Plant Atlas.
Yes.
It's
That's
the
good.
online atlas. It's a big atlas, and Joey's taken it over. He's been working on it. But he's working on another project for this semester, I think. But still, that would be something to add, because he's including all the herbarium specimens that he can get his hands on.
Sure. Yeah. It'd be a lot of work. I wouldn't want to put that on someone that their plate full, but yeah, you can nag him about it, see what he says. So
Isn't that what grad students are for?
I don't know. I've got the two on here are pretty amazing, and I want them doing their own research. So
Okay.
you all have my contact. Feel free to shoot a message. If I can answer anything anytime, don't be shy. So yeah, thanks again for coming. And gosh, enjoy those beautiful blue mountains for me. I wish I were there. Blue, i.e. green, blue from a distance.
True. Thank you so much for coming, and we appreciate it immensely. You've taken a subject that many of us didn't know a lot about and made it fun and interesting. And that's an accomplishment. Thank you.
Glad you enjoyed. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, and good night, everyone.
Go see lichens tomorrow. Start in your yard.